Nick, welcome to the show, man.
Justin, it is an absolute pleasure, sir. Great to see you, man.
Dude, I'm excited to continue our conversation. We had spoken a couple of weeks ago and you interviewed me for your show, and we just had so many things in common with our mindset and the way we approach life and the way we approach relationships and everything else in between. Now, obviously, you're somebody who has scaled and grown and sold businesses that, value over billions of dollars. And I'm, in the beginning phases of building those things. But when you look at somebody who is further along in business necessarily, but has the similar mindset, you're like, these are my people. These are the people that I need in my circle, right? Never be the smartest person in the room. So I'm glad to not be the smartest person on the Zoom call right now, and excited to have you, man. So why don't we take a second and have you introduce yourself to my audience? Tell everybody who is Nick today, and then we'll break down how you got there.
Yeah, and let's be super clear on this. Like, I only know two things, right? And they're probably in this order. I know business, and maybe for my sins, I know business too much, right? Because I was kind of obsessed with it for years. And then I know quite a lot about personal development and mindset, right? And that's a newish thing, but for the last 5 years, I've gone deep and deep and deep, just trying to work out who I am, right? And who I'm becoming. So they're my two passions. So our sort of Venn diagram must kind of overlap in that mindset piece, I'm sure.
Yeah, I went backwards. I was like, let me figure out this mindset thing and then I'll figure out business. And so, yeah, I think we're right at that crossroads for both of us.
Yeah, well, when I tell a bit of my story now, you'll see why I did it the other way around. Who knows if it's the right way around, right? Yeah, so long story. I'm Australian. I live in the UK. I've lived here for 20 years. As you said, I've had a long checkered history, level of experience in business. I started out entrepreneurially. I started out with a business when I was 18. It was a personal training business in the late 80s, early 90s. Yes, I know I look young, but I'm not. And back then, right, no one had personal trainers. Like these days, it's quite common, but back then you had to be like a lawyer, a stockbroker, a doctor, right? Sure. And so I started this business, and it was successful in terms of it helped me get through university and studies and things like that. And then I sold the business for, get this, right? Amazing number, this 3,000 Australian dollars, right?
Huge.
It's a Starbucks coffee, my man.
Oh, not so huge.
Oh, no. $3,000. I don't know what that's worth, right? It's not worth a lot of money, but that was my first exit, and we'll get into kind of that. But what happened is I was scared, I think, of being an entrepreneur. And that was partly because my grandfather, who was a massive influence on my life back then, was like, I don't care what you do, Nick, go and get a degree, right? Once you've got a degree, you can go and dig ditches, was his favorite saying. But what he really meant is, go and get a job. Yeah. And so when I was having some success as an entrepreneur, I always thought that it was going to crash. And I think in my environment at that time, I had people saying, oh, is it really working? You sure it's working? So I gave it in, and then I went and started working in the world of corporate. And for the next 15 years or thereabouts, 10 to 15 years, I worked in the media industry for companies like News International, Rupert Murdoch's empire. Sure. I ended up in New York for a while working for Getty Images. Amazing life of just traveling the world, seeing some great stuff. And that's when I started getting into the world of what is called private equity, private investment, and where you're effectively using, money from high net worth individuals, institutions, pension funds, and buying businesses, scaling businesses and selling businesses. And I went from the world of media into that world of private equity. And over that time, I was involved in 117 acquisitions and 26 exits, to the numbers that you just mentioned in the billions, and some crazy war stories and all of that. So that's the first career.
Yeah, dude, I can't even imagine the war stories that you have with that type of dollar amounts being thrown around, right? When you're in the billions, it's a different conversation. So what did you learn the first time you started? I mean, I imagine the first time you were having these types of negotiations, you're like, this is money that I can't even comprehend, let alone, just throw around dollar amounts. What was that like, experiencing that growth moment for you to say, wow, like I'm in this room having these uncomfortable conversations, but all for the greater good?
It's a little bit like after a while you become numb to the numbers.
I imagine.
And so towards the end, and this is where I kind of had to change things. It's just a number, but yeah, I suppose the only way I could probably explain it, and I was never really into this, but I imagine when you first start gambling at the casino, you start to be aware of, that's 20 pounds or 50 bucks or 100 bucks or whatever. But after a while, it just becomes numbers on a table, right? And so that was the thing. So in the beginning, to your question, it was like, are we really, going to be spending that much on a business? Are we really, these sort of things? And then when I started to get involved in it, I think part of the skill was to not get emotional, right? Not get attached and just play the game. So I became super clinical, Justin. Like I was like a machine. And in some cases, I take that with me now and I can get really focused on the outcome. Whereas a lot of people just see numbers and they just freak out because they're not used to it or they see too much risk.
Sure. No, it makes sense. When you would, but I think sometimes that there's a scary moment when you become so cerebral with a massive part of your life. Sometimes I imagine that could leak into other parts of your life. Did you experience any of that stuff where you're like, this is hurting my personal relationships and stuff like that?
That's why I had to get out. So a lot of things happen. I'll share a little bit of the story around how I call it almost like two lives, certainly two careers. But when I was in the world, really in the thick of the private equity world, and it's kind of a combination of sort of, Michael Douglas in Wall Street. Greed is good. It was in the earlier days. It's got different since then. And somewhere between that, sort of Billions and Succession, those TV shows. It's kind of like that. It sounds fun from the outside, but when you're in, it's like whatever. And I became the guy that was known for going into businesses. So what we would call portfolio businesses backed by private equity that were failing. And I would be the guy that would go in there and not necessarily run the numbers and the spreadsheets and do all that. They'd have some smart MBA guy doing that. I would be the guy going in and doing the hiring, the firing, the changing, all the change management as it's called, and effectively trying to get these underwater businesses, meaning they're worth less than what they were paid for, to get them up. And so that you can imagine what that's like, right? You're going in there and, you have to be almost like a machine.
Yeah. Changing lives for a lot of the times the worst.
Yeah. Well, for the money.
Yeah.
And there were decisions, I'll be honest about it. There were decisions that I was involved in, and I knew at the time they weren't aligned with who I am, my values. And I knew they were the wrong decisions, but I did them anyway.
Sure.
Right. And so what happened is over time that started to build up. Like anytime I think you go out there and you do something that you don't truly believe in, it comes back, right? It makes you sick. And I started to feel quite ill. At the same time, my father came back into my life when I was in my sort of mid to late 30s, and he'd left when I was 2, right?
Wow.
Now, here's the thing. This is the thing that just kicked me in the nuts, right? If you know the expression, right? You can feel this. So he was a super successful entrepreneur, right? He had this business. He was trading jewelry in Australia, in Melbourne. He was originally from the UK, but lived in Melbourne. And had this big business, 7-figure business, maybe a bit more actually. I knew he was a millionaire before he was 40, but he lost it all in a bombing, in a terrorist attack in Melbourne, where the Turkish consulate was blown up, and it was right next to where he had his jewelry store. And of course, maybe to this day it's the same, but if it's a terrorist attack, you don't get insurance for some of that stuff. Certainly back then you didn't.
Sure.
Anyway, so he lost everything, and then he rebuilt himself in his 40s, and he became a millionaire again by the time he was 50. And then obviously at that point, he came back into my life. Now, what was interesting about this is when he came back and I got to meet who he was and found out what he was really like, and he'd been away for so long, and I'd heard all these stories about what a tyrant he was and all that, and found out none of that was true. I started to get this conscious, which was when I'm working in private equity, quite often it's the entrepreneur who creates the value. They come into these environments, and the private equity suck the value out.
Right.
So here I am, right, doing that. Then I meet my dad, realize that the people that I've been screwing over for the last decade are really like him. And then one night, and here's the thing. One night, I remember going to bed, and I wake up in the middle of the night. It's about 3 a.m, and my right side of my jaw is just throbbing. And it's like I've been smashed in the face.
Wow.
I go to the bathroom, and it's red. It's like raw, right? And I'm in pain. I'm thinking, what's going on here? And I thought maybe something had fallen, like something fallen from the ceiling, or have I been bitten by a spider? Yeah, right. Anyway, so I'm, tongue's going around here in my mouth, and I can taste I've got some teeth, right? And what I've done, I ended up going to the doctor first, actually, then the dentist in the morning. Didn't sleep that night. And what I'd done is I'd cracked down on my teeth so hard in my sleep that I broke the 2 molars through here.
Wow.
Right side of my jaw. I know, right?
That's crazy.
And so I know. And the dentist said to me, she's seen this before. in similar industries, and it's all stress related. Build up, build up, build up, right? And I was feeling like crap at this time as well. So I finished this part of the story, right? So I realized at that point in time, all of this was happening. And I forgot one important part, actually. As this was happening, my father, who I'd only really just met, he passed away suddenly with cancer, really quick.
Just the compound effect of all these things.
Oh, man. So, I'm thinking, I've met my dad. That's a massive change. I'm not feeling comfortable with my values and what I'm doing. He's a successful entrepreneur. What have I done here? He then passes away. You can see it, right? The pattern comes together. So I made a decision. That I was going to quit my life of that world, even though I was earning good money and I built my whole family's support systems around this. And I called up a friend and said, what am I going to do? I was totally lost. I'd almost call this a breakdown. And he said to me, very successful guy, he said, get to a Tony Robbins event. I'm like, well, I'm not going to want that idiot. I'm not doing that. Little did I know, I sort of had his books in the bookshelf over here, right?
Sure.
Anyway.
They're good just to place over there and be like, yeah, I read those.
I had read them, but it's like anything, right? You can read something and you don't take action, but the message appears when it needs to.
Yeah, amen. Yeah.
And anyway, so at the same time, I'm sitting down with my wife and we put on his Netflix documentary. She watches it. She thinks, oh, what are you crazy? What's going on? But she realizes I need to change. And I just said to her, I said, you know what? I'm just going to go to the next event. So I got my laptop out, found out there was a UPW, Unleash the Power Within, in Chicago in about 3 weeks' time. Bought the tickets then, booked the plane thing, went over to it. 4 days in this room, I was crying my eyes out, man, because I was hearing stuff that was starting to click the dots together of all this kind of mystery in my mind,
right?
Emotions. And that was it. I came back and changed everything. And within about 3 or 4 months, I started my podcast and that just went crazy. And then everything changed from there.
I love the fact, everything that you've talked about is it proves that you're a man of action, right? Like everything you've done has been full out action. I'm just going to go do it, execute and do it. And even to the point of self-development, right? Like most people have watched Tony Robbins' thing and said, wow, that was a really fun documentary, inspiring. I might have cried when he was talking about the guy with the fucking red shoes, whatever you want to say, right? But then they don't take the action of pulling out the laptop and hitting purchase ticket and going and doing these things. Obviously you were at this moment in your life where you were like, I need something. What would you say to somebody who knows they have to take action, but there's something holding them back, whether it's fear or anxiety or worry? What are the things that you would say to somebody that like action is the only thing that matters?
Yeah, I've never heard anyone express it like that. So thank you. And you're right. If I think back and reflect on it, I've always been one that has to initiate, right? Maybe not always follow through. So that's a different point. But yeah, for me, I was in a place of it had to change now. It was building up and you could argue, and this is a good point for anyone listening. I knew I needed to do this a few years before, but it was only the physical manifestation of the pain in that moment. It became so acute that if I didn't do something, I was probably going to do something more drastic, right? Health-wise or whatever. And so my feeling is this, to your question. We all know when things aren't right? I was asking myself for quite a few years, and it came into my head like this, really weird. It came into my head, are you happy? Are you happy? Like this kind of voice, right? And I wasn't, but I didn't answer the question. And so my advice to people is if you've got that inkling, sometimes you do have to go to the bottom to really make the change. But if you've got that feeling, it's probably best to start listening to it as early as you can.
Yeah, dude. And it's so true. And obviously I think, coming from, the fitness world in your young life, you were always very keen to how your body felt and everything like that. A lot of times when people are living their life and they're super unhealthy and they're all these things, they remain unhealthy because they don't realize that anything's wrong, because they're already feeling gross every single day. They just think that that's how you're supposed to feel. I think the igniter to that is, guess what? You're not supposed to actually feel like crap. So do something about it, kind of deal. Right. And I think I said I think we talked about a little bit about this when I was on your podcast, but we talked about the idea that we are told by society that we need to be a certain way. We need to go, especially as men, we need to go make the money, have the nice car, have the hot woman, have the whatever, or man, whatever, right? And create that life. And then all of a sudden, once we get there, that's where happiness comes from. But you're living proof of this. Like, okay, you had all the things and society beat you, or I guess the world beat you down and said, hey, you need to wake up. There's more to this world. And again, it came in that physical manifestation. How do you now, going to that rock bottom moment, right, and saying, this is it for me, I need to make a change now? How do you make sure that it doesn't perpetuate, how it doesn't come back around? How do you keep yourself in check?
So there's a lot of, I could answer that in multiple ways, and I've learned ways, and I think I'm still evolving that. But one thing I knew is once I jumped off the cliff, and I was very strategic, and I'll explain this succinctly as I can, because I think it will help people. There's this saying, it comes from the Tony Robbins world. It's certainly where I first heard it, about burning the boat, right? You know, just throw it in and, jump. And I couldn't do that, right? I had, my kids, my two girls and my wife, I created a life for them. And one thing I did say to my wife, and that gave me some leverage, was, I'm going to make these changes. I need to make these changes. And she was hugely supportive of it, but I'm not going to let it impact you. And that was the leverage that I had to then own, right?
Sure.
So that was difficult. So I was very strategic. I knew I was going to come back and quit everything, but I wasn't going to do it straight away. The podcast was the first thing I did. And I did that because I wanted to share my message and help people. And the thing that I'd learned in those 4 days at the Tony Robbins event was, I was chasing achievement and I had zero fulfillment. Okay. And I needed to fill my contribution cup up. And if I could go out there and tell my story and be honest and as vulnerable as I felt comfortable at the time, maybe that message would help people. And eventually it pissed off the private equity firm so much, they said, close the podcast down. And the day that they did that, is so funny, right? I had the letter in my bag. And I said to my wife, I said, I'm not going to quit, because, we need to transition this in some way into something I can then do for income and for our lives. But I had the letter. And the day they said, this is it, ultimatum, I just got the letter out and said, here you go. Interestingly, by that time, it took about a year. I'd already built up enough of the foundations of what I do now that there was money coming in to support that, which was absolutely fine. So to your question, sorry, long answer, but I think it's important for people to hear. These days, what I've learned is you've got to create a system that allows you to move into the life that's, you want to create and that's meant for you. For me, that's environment, right? It's hanging out with people who are challenging me. You mentioned before about smartest person in the room. I don't ever want to be that now. Matt, maybe years ago I did. I want to be the guys learning. I want to create, I have bets with myself, about what I can become. And quite often those bets are scary bets. Like, I've got some big bets out there and I got no idea how they're going to happen. Right. Yeah. But they make me feel alive to be able to try. Right. And then in terms of energy and all that, I have crazy routines and habits around that. I'm not this 5 a.m. dude who has to get up there and meditate for 25 hours. I maximize. I know, right? Like, do you know what? I tried all that, right? And then I just got tired.
It's too much. You're like, okay, now my day's done, right? Oh no, wait, it just started. Got it. All right.
No, but listen, I don't judge anything, right? If that works for some people, the 445 club or whatever it's called, great. But for me, you know what it is, right? It's super simple. I do meditate because I do need to give myself the space, right? But I try and keep that as simple as possible. But for me, it's sleep. I always try and get a hell of a lot of sleep when I never used to. I used to live on 5 hours a night. I don't know how I did that. Yeah. Nutrition, so water and healthy food, and then exercise. So that exercise has always been part of my identity. But I find that the more, again, I lean into that, my power comes from how I feel about myself, from my physicality. And they're the things that are important to me.
No, and that's huge. And it's funny because you kind of answered something that I'm going to ask you later, but it'll be interesting to see if you alter it a little bit as far as that goes. But yeah, man, I mean, I think, making sure that you're running on all cylinders is so insanely important. I always say that you can't pour from an empty cup. And a lot of times, high achievers like yourself, we try and pour from an empty cup, and we go, I can keep giving, I can keep giving, I can keep giving. Look at what I can do. And that's really kind of the thought process. But again, going back to dropping the ego and saying, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room, I think that's a massive shift for anybody to embrace, like truly, truly embrace. And I think a lot of people say it, but they don't actually mean it. Like, I really don't mind walking into a room and going, oh man, I'm going to sound like an idiot in about 20 minutes. And then 15 minutes later, I already sound like an idiot. But I'm like, I'm here to learn. So it's perfectly fine. Right. And that's all part of it. And this podcast has allowed me to make sure that I'm never the smartest person in the room. Like, my circle is so insanely amazing because of it. So I want to pivot a little bit to your podcast, as that was the catalyst for your change. It was the catalyst for my change, which is really, really cool to talk about. But what did you notice while doing the podcast, and where did you kind of see opportunity to not only level up and grow a business, but to also grow your network and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, it was funny actually. Where it happened from, I was in my local bowling alley with the kids and a friend. It's true, right? Sometimes the ideas that change your life come in the weirdest places, right? There's nothing romantic about it. And there was a guy there who is quite successful I live in a small city village area outside of London. And my friend said, "Oh, that guy there, he's one of the wealthiest guys in the region in Peterborough. And he's also got this podcast and all this sort of stuff." And I, at that time, I was kind of going through, and I think, well, it wasn't so much about the wealth. It was about, well, how do you do that? How do you have a platform to express yourself and then also be able to generate income from it that can then allow you to do more of that? And I was fascinated. And so my wife has had a successful blog for a number of years. And I kind of, again, it's the people closest to you don't always recognize, like, she's been doing this for 7 years, right? And then I thought, what would happen if I just put myself out there? And so I actually ended up contacting this guy, called him up and said, listen, can you mentor me? This is the first time I'd ever spent any money on mentoring. Any development I ever got was paid for by the private equity firms. You don't really value it the same way.
Sure.
And yeah, and he just said, listen, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't really know. I said, I just have a feeling that I need to lean into this because I need to do something that's out of my comfort zone to take me on the springboard to where I think I want to go. Right. And then that was a whole heap of reflection and inner work to think about where I want to go as well.
Yeah.
But what happened was he sort of said to me, he goes, "Oh, what do you know about?" And I said, "Well, I know how to grow businesses. I know how to fix things in businesses." And he said, "Why don't you do a podcast called Grow Your Business?" So that was boring. And I said, "I quite like scale up because I kind of go into bigger businesses and scale them." And he goes, "Oh, okay, why don't you call it Scale Your Business?" And so anyway, it became Scale Up Your Business. And the first 20 odd episodes were me talking into a mic by myself. So bad.
Dude.
I had the mic the wrong way around the first time, Justin.
Oh, that's great. Ray Charles, man.
It was very bad. But you know what's funny? And here's the thing. I was doing it, I think, to help people. I was doing it to fill the contribution cup. I was doing it to give me some sort of cathartic experience, a little bit my own personal therapy, right? No way would I have seen a therapist back then. That would have been too hard for me. Like, I wasn't ready. But this was a way, like journaling maybe. And then people just started to listen to it. And then it started to get traction, partly because I think it was more about mindset than it was about business. And I've kept that all the way through. And then it went to number 1 in the charts within 3 months in the UK, and it stayed there for ages, like 9 weeks. Wow. Above everything, above, all the big names. No idea why. I didn't do anything. There was no marketing. It was just the podcast. And people started to reach out, and they said that they respected the vulnerability of someone like myself with that experience, going out there and actually pretty much saying I screwed up. I screwed up a lot of things, and I wanted to change that. And I think that mixture then allowed me to have the confidence to go and do other stuff around that as well.
Dude, it's so crazy that we're having this conversation now, because I help people grow their brands. And a lot of the conversation we have is around podcasting and how to utilize it and mix it into your brand. And I work with some big names. And I was actually talking with somebody yesterday who is very much behind the scenes. Like, she has Facebook groups with thousands of people, but I had no idea who she was, and nobody really knows who she is. And so she wants to take her brand and step in front of people. And we had that exact conversation. I said, number one, you're going to suck when you start. Like, that's just the reality. Like, as you start to tell your story publicly, whether it be through podcasting or on a stage, like, it's very, very uncomfortable. I shared some stories about me being terrible in the beginning, and, it's just repetition, right? You just get better as you do more of it.
Yeah.
And I go, number two, you're going to be really scared to share certain things, but those certain things you're scared of, those are the things that are going to resonate with your audience, because that vulnerability piece is what sets you apart than any other person who scales up businesses, right? That's you being 100% you. And that's so absolute key, right? Now, obviously here you are, this show blows up, and you started, I mean, if I'm piecing it to, was it 2018?
Yeah. So 2018 was when it all happened. So Tony Robbins was 2018. And then later that year, the podcast. And if I can just say one thing before we kind of move on, even 2 days ago when I was in Dubai, one of my friends, I was having a drink with him, and he said, you've got to stop doing that. And what he meant is, there are still times when I fall back into, I have to try and justify who I am. So this idea that, and I wanted to share this because I think sometimes, people hear people on podcasts and they think they're all their shit together, right? He's like, there's still these points where you'll fall back into what you were, and the recognition of that is important. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that sometimes you've got to realize that you're always evolving from this.
Yeah. When you're a certain way for 30 years, it's hard not to just go back into autopilot into the person you were. And so I love that you shared that. I think that's really important. It's something that we talk about pretty often on this show, because I'm certainly not perfect, right? Like, I don't ever want people to listen to this show or see me speak somewhere and go, I want to be like Justin. No, you don't. Like, you want to be the best version of you, and whatever that means, right? And so thank you so much for sharing that. And so obviously 2018, you started this podcast. And the reason I wanted to point out the time frame, 2018 in the UK, podcasting was really just becoming a thing. So in the United States, we were a little bit before that. I want to say 2015, 2016. That's when I started. So I was early in the United States to kind of grow a podcast. People would be like, what's a podcast? And then Canada came on board, and then the UK. And the UK was that third country to kind of come in and go, okay, maybe this whole thing will be solidified around the world. And now, my podcast gets played in 100 countries every single week, which is wild to think about, and as you really go, okay, this thing has really grown. So obviously here you go, you start 2018, you start to grow this brand, you start to open up and share a little bit about some of your mistakes and all that stuff. Where has it gone since then, and where is it going now for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've just made a bit of a change to it. And I feel more congruent now with the change. It's actually, what I'm doing now is actually probably more aligned with the vision I started to have early on when I started to get a bit of traction with it. But it was, as I said, it was called Scale Up Your Business, and the focus initially was that. Mm-hmm. And I got some really amazing guests that came on as well. And it was funny, actually. It was when I had a guy called Patrick Bet-David come on. And he was very grateful with his time afterwards. I spent an hour with him after the podcast, right? Wow. And he said to me, it's lots of things, but he said, Nick, you've got to double down on this private equity thing, because the stuff lots of people would love to know, particularly business owners who are trying to build something that creates freedom for them, time and money freedom. You know how to do that. And so that changed my thinking a bit. And I thought, hold on, perhaps I need to bring more of this more of the technical stuff into this as well, with the inspiration, with the mindset, with the identity stuff.
Sure.
And so I started to do more of that. And then the guests that I got on started to become different. And then one of my mentors said to me, why don't you just go all in and get rid of the business, right? So we changed the podcast. This is quite recent. We changed it to Scale Up with Nick Bradley. And at its heart, there's a lot of business in there, but I've now got, sporting people, legends actually, coming on. I've got people who are doing just amazing things where they're scaling up and leveling up. And I'm more interested now in the person that someone needs to become, and not even if they're there. So they might even be on the beginning of that journey, but learning from both perspectives. And so the podcast now has got such a broad range of people who just have amazing stories. And I try and keep it across a few different things, where like health, and it is still wealth, but I still want people to be able to come and listen to someone. And that one message, as I've said a few times tonight, can change everything. And so, for me, podcast is that. I'm speaking more around that topic, and Scale Up is just something I'm super passionate about.
Yeah, you talk about people who are trying to become the best version of themselves. My question for you, surrounding that is, do you think you ever really get there? Is there a place to get to?
No, no, it's a journey all the way through until the end. And actually, you could argue that the legacy part of that, the stuff that you probably don't see as much of, I think that continues and evolves even after you're not around.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I love that you said that. And that's the one cool part about having the podcast. I'm like, this will be here forever, hopefully, unless Apple goes down and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and they all disappear, right? So all of these audio content, everything that I've recorded on the show will be around forever. And so hopefully I've controlled the narrative a little bit, right? Like Ben Franklin lived this life where he's become a certain way because he couldn't record his thoughts. He couldn't do all these things. He could write some stuff, but at some point your hand gets tired. So, with that being said, I think it's so true as your legacy evolves and grows. Like, what are you doing now to make sure, generations and generations after you're here, that your legacy is even more grand than you left, right? And I think that's really cool to think about. So I'm glad you said that. That's actually
Yeah,
a
I
really
start
cool
quite
thought.
small with that, just to add to as well. Like, I've had my two daughters come on a couple of episodes. I did a review of a book called The Way of the Warrior Kid.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great book. And mental blank who it's by now, the Jocko Willink, I think it is.
Yep.
And my little daughter comes on at the end and talks about her favorite bit. And I kind of did that also because, again, if I'm not around, who knows how long I've got, right? She can go back and listen to that. So it starts there. And then, of course, stuff that I want to be able to create and what I want to help people do in the world, that's something that's still a mission, if you like, of mine that has a vision, which is a long way out. And I honestly think that when people create that vision, it can inspire you just to keep on going, and everything just changes when you get clarity on that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So obviously, just like you, we get the opportunity to sit down and talk with some of the most successful people in the world, however you want to define success. And so my question for you, it's a two-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Yeah, cool. Success for me has, oh God, it's evolved so much. So if you'd asked me this 5-10 years ago, I would have said money, Ferrari, house, Porsche. I still like cars, by the way.
Have you ever owned a Ferrari?
I've had Porsches. I had 2. I had 2, but when the time I quit my private equity job, I don't have those anymore. I've gone into green cars now. What does that say?
No, I love it. But I just asked you that because now people have to go listen to your show and figure out why I asked you that.
Okay. I know. Very good. And we'll keep that one for a secret. Just listen in a couple of weeks and you'll understand exactly what Justin's on about. Success for me, you've covered it actually. Success for me, and I wrote this down a few years back, is about becoming the best version of yourself, but not just to the point where it rips you apart, but where you are absolutely content, congruent with the things that matter, what I call your values. Values not in terms of integrity, honesty, but what you want to spend your time doing and who you want to spend your time with, right? Best version of you, I find, or the best version of me, is when I'm 100% present and doing the stuff that gives me the greatest amount of joy, right? As simple as that. And where I extend that a little bit, and this is really important to me, is I want to inspire people to get to that place.
Yeah.
Right. And it's such a subjective thing, right? It's a feeling, it's a timing, it's all of that. And I don't think it's a destination, right? I don't think it is. And to your question, which I loved, I don't think you maybe always are there and you're not always feeling like you're there, but you have to then realize that just being on that road and that pathway is what the success ultimately is.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's a great question. And I think it's a hard thing to always answer, but I feel for the first time in the last few years that I'm actually clearer on what that is for me. And then beforehand, it would have been a boring answer. You would have, what's this idiot doing on my show?
Look, it's funny because and we'll get to the second part of that question here in a second, but I love asking that question. And it's something that has become, I ask every single guest. This came later in the show and it's become such a powerful question because I think from the outside, people see these guests who have sometimes billions of dollars and have millions of followers and have the, for lack of a better term, the influence over massive amounts of people to do and say and be what they want. And it has nothing to do with that. Their success has nothing to do with that. And so the real piece is, like you said, do you need to figure out the society piece first before you figure out the fulfillment piece for yourself? And that's actually part of what I'm doing a lot of research on for the book that I'm writing, because it's an interesting kind of dynamic to kind of figure that out, right? So to follow up on what you just said, what are the 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success?
So as I said, I've got a whole heap of different routines and whatever else. I do love to be productive. So I make sure that I plan everything, right? I plan things around results and outcomes. And this is where it kind of gets a little bit boring, but it works for me, right? I have very clear, focused priorities around outcomes over 90 days. So I plan everything about results. And why I say that to people is it's not, you know, I don't care about having lots of activities. I just want to do the things that are going to be the shortest pathway towards the outcome. Okay. And I think that comes a little bit from my private equity days and that precision and that tactileness that we talked about.
Sure.
The counterbalance of that is I ask myself, you know, is what I'm doing today serving someone? Is it making me happy? And is it on the pathway to my bigger vision and my mission? And I write that down every day. Actually, I look at my diary and I'm thinking, is what I'm doing today there? And to be frank and honest again, not every day is. Not every day is.
Yeah.
And I think it's important sometimes to give yourself the grace that not every day is like that. But if too many of those days, I think Steve Jobs said it best, if too many of those days are adding up, if every day is like that, that's the sign that maybe you're not where you should be and not on the path that's going to get you to the greatest level of happiness.
Yeah. Dude,
and then the last thing I do is, and I mentioned this beforehand, really, really focus on my physicality. And there's 2 reasons for that. I didn't mention it earlier, but I used to be quite overweight as a kid and I had a challenge to transform that. So when I was that personal trainer and had that business, I honestly believe that mental strength and to some extent emotional strength comes from the one thing you can control with discipline, right? And that's what you put in your mouth, how you exercise, you know, and everyone knows those things are important, but not a lot of people do them. For me, it's almost my superpower to keep that in check.
I love it, man. I love it. And also so many important things that you just said right there. And I think there's so many lessons in what do high achievers do every single day. And sometimes it's such a simple yet difficult thing, like you said, right? Like to not every day is perfect, but are you keeping yourself in balance across every single day? And that's really the key. So I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, how do people get a hold of you? What's all the good information?
Oh yeah, cool. You can find me usual places. Listen to the podcast if you want to listen to that. Don't listen to the first 2 episodes.
Oh, you know, they're all going and listening to the first 2 episodes now.
You can listen to them and say, God, you were crap. No. Scale Up with Nick Bradley's the podcast. I've got a Facebook group, which is Build Your Business Empire. That's where I focus a lot of stuff on the business. So if anyone has a business, they're trying to build something bigger, then that's a great place. The community itself is awesome. I'm there, but the community is amazing. And then just, Instagram, LinkedIn, it's The Real Nick Bradley. I had to change it. It's funny, like I had so many people copying the profile. I thought I have to do, it was Hugh Jackman that inspired me. He was like the real Hugh Jackman. So I thought, as a fellow Aussie, I'm going to call myself The Real Nick Bradley.
I love it. Do you know Hugh Jackman? You should know Hugh Jackman.
You know what? Okay,
I
so
knew
just
there was
quickly.
A story. I knew there was a story.
I'm going to keep this quick. I'm conscious. I know that you've I don't want to over.
You're good.
All right. So that's funny. So back in the day, I was in Sydney. I told you I was working for the media empire, right? And you kind of think you meet all these famous people, and to some extent you do. But I was in the gym, and it was like 6 a.m. in the morning at Bondi Junction. And I'm there doing some bench press, and I was in good shape back then, better shape than I am now. And this guy comes in, he's got a massive beard, and he kind of says, "Oh, can I work in with you on the bench press?" And I said, yeah. So we do it. You know, he's lifting heaps more than me, and my ego's being checked at the door here. And we're just having a chat, but nothing much. Like, I'm spotting him for a bit, and then he goes off and does some stuff. And I'm thinking, I know this guy. Anyway, this personal trainer guy comes in and yells from the other side of the gym, "Hey, Hugh, how's it going?" And I'm like, "It's Hugh Jackman," like I think from Van Helsing or something. Wow. And so I met him, but like I can't own that.
No, that's great. And you're like, "Oh crap, I potentially missed an opportunity." And of course he could out bench press people who are super fit, and then he can out dance you and then out sing you.
And apparently he's a nice guy. And I'm going to put this out there in case anyone knows it. He's in my top 3 guests that I want on the show. And I already know what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how do you stay so level-headed and genuinely just great, because like everyone I've spoken to says he's that guy. When you've just, your star, if you like, has just gone through the universe.
Yeah.
Right. I'd love to understand that.
That's awesome. Who are your top three?
Well, Tony Robbins, to thank him actually and say, you know what, I should have read your books and taken action.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'd like to have him on. Hugh Jackman is in there for sure. And then, do you know what? I haven't thought. I'd like to bring, this is a bit of a weird one. I'd like to bring someone in like The Rock.
Hell yeah. Yeah.
You know, because I'd like to bridge that as well. But I you know, the first two are a long way ahead of the third one.
Yeah.
The Rock's going to listen to this now and he's going to go, I'm never going on that show.
The Rock is he would be a hard get for sure. Now I know people who know The Rock. Like I'm, you know, one person of separation. Actually, one of the keynotes at my event knows The Rock.
Oh, wow. See, there you go. You put it out there, mate, and things happen.
Two of them know The Rock, actually, which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about the fact that I only have 6 speakers counting me from a keynote standpoint.
Really? It's funny how this happens, though. And I think, you know, if I was really asked, I'd like to have brought some people on who aren't around anymore, you know, and have conversations with those people. You know, I mean, like the classic ones like Nelson Mandela. I mean, I'd love to ask, how do you stay true to your vision with so much going on? Those sort of things. But again, you know, I've only really opened up to the possibility. Obviously, not that's possible, but even these bigger conversations in the last, you know, probably year. And so my mind is still evolving around this stuff.
Yeah, and mine's always evolving too. My number one's always been Andy Grammer. I just love his music. But Rogan continuously climbs the charts, and I'm one person separation. Now he's going through all this crap right now, which is why I really want to bring him on. Like I'm very much like, hey, you're going through some stuff. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it on the show, which I love. But anyway, I wrap up every single interview with the same question, man. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is: in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
It's definitely what I shared today in terms of the transition, probably the emotional transition that I had to go through, and to lean into that heart-led thinking because I was so repressed. But then if I go back, and I'll just share this quickly, you know, I went through the transformation of being the fat bullied kid for years, and I had to break through that. And then I had, you know, other challenges as well. Like, and I think the summary of all these sort of things is we all go through challenges. It's what you do about them that makes the biggest difference. And these days, for me, that's where the most of growth happens, I think, for all of us.
I love it, man. Look, Nick, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story with my audience, sharing your wisdom with my audience, and continuing to do what you're doing to really better the world, to really pour your heart and your feelings and your emotions and your smart business tactics as well into the world to help this world become who they want to be, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, Justin, it's been an absolute pleasure, sir. Thank you for having me on today.